welcome to my home. I am Cheyenne Cornett Little, Manchester, Kentucky. I'm 74 years old, and how I started my quilting was my mother in law really inspired me. She, I took care of my mom for 5 years. I took care of my mother in law for 3 years. And she would sit and quilt all day, hand stitching, quilting. And I wouldn't do it. I, just talked to her and asked, admired her quilts and everything. And like I said, when I got sick, my daughter bought me a sewing machine. She said, Mom, you need to do something, get you some kind of hobby. So I started embroidering. And then I said, well, I can embroider and quilt too at the same time. And I'll show you that quilt in a minute. And what else do you want to know?
What was your mother-in-law's name?
My mother-in-law name was Gladys Little. She was also from Manchester, Kentucky, like my mom. My mom was from Manchester, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
As far as me, I was born in Hazard, Kentucky. And all these are my kinfolks, and these are my kinfolks. But we're a real close knit family here, and these are my Ace Coon spoons. These two over here. But I can't wait to show you. My mom's name was Dorothy Wallace Greenlee. And like I said, she was from Manchester. My granny's name was Letty Wallace, which I named my daughter. We name our kids after our ancestors. Letty made her first quilt, and I'll show you that, out of t-shirts. I tried that, but the t-shirt, she didn't tell me the trick to put the backing on these t-shirts so they wouldn't stretch. So I tried to do one and it stretch all kind of ways. So I said, I'm not doing that. But that was a little story behind that.
All right.
What else do you need to know?
All right. Do you think quilting in the African American community is going by the wayside?
Very much so. Like I said, out of let me see how many people we have at church, y'all, young women. Say about 24 black women.
Probably about 15.
About 15. Out of 15, these two here are the only one here in Manchester that is interested in quilts.
Do you have a quilting circle at church?
No.
So you have a quilting circle here at your home.
I belong to one, but it's not black historic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the only black one that goes. Out of it's about 34 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
I'm the
So
only
what do you think? What do you think would heighten the interest, in this generation now, to learn more about quilting and so forth?
It's really hard with this young generation now. It is so hard to get them into anything, as far as our kids. Now, my daughter's, as she aged, she got a little bit more into it, but now her children, no.
Mm-hmm.
They're not interested in it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do or to get them active in it. It seemed like if we went to like these all these family reunions that we go to, if we had someone there to quilt there, maybe this would draw their interest. Because it drawed it, for me. when I watched, like I said, my mother-in-law, my mother, my grandma, it but I didn't get into it until I aged or until I got sick and couldn't do nothing else
So you've been quilting just for a couple of years.
for a couple of years, and I've got 15 already, but about 15 tops already finished.
Oh.
That's all I do.
That's great.
That's all I do.
That's great. All right.
My name is Glenna Pennington. I'm a 70-year-old retired school teacher. I was born and raised here in Manchester, Kentucky. And my mother inspired me to quilt. She quilted until she was about 92 years old. I think that's how old she was when she made her last one.
What was her name?
Her name was Eva Gilbert. Our mother, Eva Gilbert, she made this. She was good friends with a lady named Miss Moore, and Miss Moore hand quilted. And this is one of the first quilts that Mama ever made. Miss Moore hand quilted it. And she always, every quilt that Mama made, she liked patterns, fabric that had little bitty flowers in it. And just about every quilt she has ever made has those little flowers in it.
And that is hand stitched.
This is hand stitched and hand quilted. Yes.
And this is the first one that she made. So around what year would you think?
Now, we were grown when Mama started. So, I'd say probably in the 80s. I would say in the 80s she started quilting. My daughter, Crystal, she's almost 48 now. And I started making this quilt when she was about 7. She has a twin bed. And so I thought it would be cute on her bed. So after I made probably about 10 blocks, I got tired of fooling with it. And so I decided that I didn't want to finish this quilt. And I know a couple of times I had it in a yard sale. I had a yard sale, and I had the pieces, the blocks that I had made, and the rest of the material that I was going to use to finish it. It never did sell. But when I'd come home from the yard sale, I would take my clothes and donate them to the Goodwill. But for some reason, I would take this quilt and put it back in the drawer. I'd done that twice. And then finally, she was probably about 30, between 25 and 30. I decided I'm going to finish this quilt. And so that's where this quilt came from.
Tell us about the pattern. Anything specific?
The pattern is a strawberry. What I did was cut out the white square, and this is sort of like applique. I used my sewing machine. I would sew the pink part and on the white square, and then I would put the green part on it.
All right. How long have you been quilting?
I've been quilting probably for about 40 years. I started when my daughter was about 8. She was about 8.
And who inspired you to quilt?
My mother. She would work in a garden every summer, and then in the winter, she would lay and make about 3 quilts every winter. Like I said, she made her last one probably when she was probably close to 92 when she made her last one.
And were these quilts, the quilts that she made, passed down through your siblings and so forth?
Yeah. And when she passed, she probably had about 25 at the house, and we gave nieces that we thought were interested in one of them. We gave them one, and cousins.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Didn't give me one.
Well, my name is Margaret Word. I am Glenna Pennington's sister. Eva Gilbert was my mother. So she inspired us to quilt. I didn't have the patience that my mother had. Quilting takes patience. Uh, but we would enjoy quality time every evening. I would go down and sit with mom. Well, she'd lay in the bed and I'd sit on the edge of the bed, and I would help in cutting out the patterns, uh, putting them together, pinning them together so she could stitch them, especially in her, as she got older. She required a little bit more help getting the pieces put together the way they were supposed to be. Um, but that was good quality time. We'd sit and watch Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy every night. That was our family routine. And Mama would lay in the bed and quilt. And when I go to her house, we still have her house open. The family kept everything open when she passed. And I go in the room where she lay and quilt. She even wore a little piece out on her headboard where she'd prop that head up there, and she'd quilt for hours and hours and hours. But I tried quilting. I tried. One winter, we all bought patterns and we cut them out, and we were going to sew when it started to snow. I think I made maybe 6-7 blocks. I had a pretty good stitch too, but I just didn't have the patience to sit hour after hour and sew those pieces together. So that's more my sister and my mother. It was their hobby, but I did participate in cutting the patterns out and pinning them together and everything for her. So, but like my sister said, we have one of the first quilts mother ever made, and then we also have one of the last quilts that she had made. And when we gave all our quilts out to her family, our brothers didn't quite see the quality of the quilts. So my sister and I ended up with the majority of the quilts. And so what we did when Mother passed, we each bought a glass cabinet, so we could display her work and keep the quilts safe. And so when I have visitors come to my house, that's the first thing they go to is that quilt cabinet. And they have questions about, what was this pattern? How long did it take to make this pattern and things like that? And she still has, we gave away probably 10 or 15 of them when she passed. And we still both have a cabinet full. And then there are probably 15, 20 more top pieces that haven't been quilted yet. That's, we've got stored away. So, but like my sister said, in the summer she would garden. She would garden from like April, May to August, September. And then for the fall and the winter, she would lay in that bed and she would quilt all winter long. She'd end up making about 3 quilts every winter. So
your mother, who inspired her to quilt? How did she get started quilting?
Her mother, our grandmother, Polly Walker.
Polly Walker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Share a little bit about what you remember about her.
Well, I don't remember a whole lot about. We called her Mammy, Mammy Polly, and I remember couldn't wait till Saturday night. Daddy would take us up there on Saturday morning, and we'd stay all night with her, and I'd sleep right behind her every Saturday night in that little cold. That fire would go out. I think I was gonna freeze to death, but and she was such a good cook. But Mammy, she quilted. And but I mean, everything wasn't no such thing as taking it somewhere to get it quilted. She did it all by hand.
Yeah. When was she born?
Who, my grandmother?
Grandmother. Yeah. Don't remember.
I don't remember.
Okay.
No.
Do you remember when she passed away and how old she was when she passed away?
I know she was probably about 76 when she passed away. It's been quite a few years ago.
Okay. All right. Cheyenne, what about, you said your mother-in-law, your mother, what inspired them, looking back another generation.
Well, my mother-in-law is their first cousin. Is their first cousin. So I guess it was her grandmother, her mother, her mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
That inspired Gladys.
Uh-huh.
But my mother was Mama Letty, and Mama Letty was born 1900,
Mm.
and she passed. Mama Letty was 89, I think. I'm not for sure,
Mhm.
but I know she was born 1900. But I remember Mama Letty, like Glenna said, they had these grapes. They didn't have gas heat and all that.
Mhm.
And if you didn't sit up there close to that grape, you're going to freeze to death in that house or get in bed with one of these. They wasn't calling them quilting at that time, I don't think. I think they called themselves making blankets
Blankets.
for bed, to
Blankets.
stay warm.
Mhm.
And back in the day, they used to make them out of clothing.
Right.
Old dresses that they had, or
Mhm.
They didn't
clothes
have
that were worn
fabric.
out, jeans and things like that.
Feed sacks,
Yeah.
from flour sacks and stuff.
Mhm.
And
And they were making them as a necessity to stay warm.
Yeah.
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 And they would quilt by hand, and they would use that yarn. Remember, they would take that yarn
Mm.
and stick them and tie it. And they had that little raggedy looking yarn.
Yeah. Tack. Tack.
Yeah,
They
my
were
sister
tack
has
carried.
made.
Tack,
Yeah,
yeah.
my sister has made.
Uh-huh. I
Some
made
of
my brother
those.
one. He's a University of Louisville fan, and I made him a U of L quilt. And instead of having it quilted, I tacked it.
Mhm.
Oh,
So,
okay.
That takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, where did you learn to do that?
I just picked it up on my own. I think I don't. I remember that's how Mammy used to do hers, but I never. I mean, I was young. I never did watch her do it, but I know all hers were tacked.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay. All right. Any other memories that you have, like you're sharing now, before we go to the quilts? Any other memories that you have?
Well, as Mama got older, it was becoming a little bit more difficult for her to do the quilting. So I would sit at night trying to pin together enough to keep her busy, for the next day until I came down
the next night,
and I would pin her some more pieces together because she started having trouble figuring out how the pattern was supposed to fit together. So I would say, now, Mom, don't stitch anything together that I haven't pinned for you. And I think I've got enough to do you until I get back the next evening. And she'd say, okay, I promise I won't stitch anything together that you haven't pinned. Well, she stitches so quickly that I thought I had an abundant amount pieced together. But she would get through what I had pinned and she would just take it upon herself to stitch things that weren't pinned together. And I'd come down and I'd open up the quilt and I'd start looking at it and things would start looking, that doesn't look quite the way it's supposed to. I said, Mom, did you go ahead and stitch something that I didn't have pinned? And I would get so tickled at her. And she said, well, I might have. So I'd have to spend 30, 40 minutes there at the end ripping everything apart that she had stitched that I hadn't pieced together. But now, like my sister said, that was when she was like maybe 92 and she was struggling a little bit with how the patterns would fit together. But I'd want to be mad at her for doing that because it's a lot of extra work on me. But she was just so proud of what she had accomplished that day that I couldn't be mad at her.
Yeah.
So she'd sit and laugh while I'd rip those pieces apart, and then I'd pin it back together, thinking again I'd have enough pinned for her to sew the next day. It was hard to keep her keep enough for her because she stitched so fast, didn't she, sister?
Mhm.
And she wouldn't
Yeah.
stitch an hour or two. She would sew from the time she got up in the morning until the time she went to bed at night.
Mm.
So
Wow.
it was hard to keep enough ready for her,
Mhm.
but she loved it.
And how
She-
many across her lifetime? How many quilts did
Oh
she make?
my. I don't know. It's really hard to say. She'd make at least 3 or 4 every winter.
Yeah, but the last 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was always hard to try to find her something to get for Christmas.
Mm.
So about the last 5 years of her life, or when she was quilting, Margaret and I, every Christmas, I would find a pretty pattern, and I would buy all the fabric for it, and Margaret would buy fabric for another one, and we'd cut them all out, cut the pieces out, and have them in a
Wow.
box, and give them to her as a Christmas present.
Wrapped
Awesome.
up.
Wrapped up, and she really enjoyed
She
those presents.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it was so hard trying to find something for her for Christmas because she had everything she ever wanted. And so we finally decided, well, let's just do quilts because she loves quilts.
Mhm.
So I would have a whole box of patterns cut out. My sister would have a whole box of patterns cut out. And yeah, the last few years, that's what we got her for Christmas.
All right.
And she was so happy when she'd
Oh,
open
yeah.
those boxes. She couldn't wait to get started on those quilts.
She
Mhm.
loved it.
She loved
She
quilting.
loved it.
All right.
And then she would put them in the cedar chest. She would have the old cedar
yeah.
chest. And it would be full. We'd have to press them down in there. There would be so many. And she would want the children and the grandchildren to come and pick them one
Mhm.
out.
And
So
when
we
they
would
picked
put their
one
name
out,
on
yeah,
it.
she would put them in a pillowcase.
Mhm.
She put them in a pillowcase and have us to write their name on it.
Mm.
Oh.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So when she passed, she had 2 big cedar chests
Mm-hmm.
full of quilts with her grandchildren, her children, yeah, with their names written on it, so they would know that one was for them. Mhm.
Do you think how did they react? Then do they realize the significance of what they were receiving?
No,
I don't think they do.
I get so mad. I get so mad at my daughter.
She was giving. No.
My daughter, my daughter lives in Lexington, Kentucky, and sometimes I can go visit her, and a quilt is laying on the floor with one of her dogs laying there with it.
I know you.
I can't
get
hardly
mad.
stand it, but
So we were
No.
really selective about who we did when she
Yeah.
passed. When she
Mhm.
passed away, we tried to give some of her quilts to people we knew would value
yeah,
the quilts.
but people just
Well,
don't
that's-
understand the
They don't
time.
understand the
Right,
time
yeah.
that it takes
Right.
to make
Right.
one of
And
those
the love.
quilts and the
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But now my sons, they had the best time picking their quilts out. We would get all the quilts out and lay them on the beds, and everybody would get to pick their pattern.
Mm.
And my sons, they would change their minds. They'd have one pattern picked out, and the next 2 or 3 months, she'd lay them out again. They'd, oh no, I don't want that one. I want this one. So, but I have their quilts at my home, safe for them. For
When you know they.
when
probably
I know they
appreciate
would
it.
appreciate them.
Yeah.
I will give them their quilts
Yeah.
when I know they'll understand
Yeah.
what love and work went into making those quilts.
Mm, yeah. And it is something to cherish, something that's passed down,
Mhm.
to each generation. You would hope that when, they have kids, that they'll tell the story behind that quilt and pass it
Mhm.
down, and that way it keeps it going. And it's like that person that created that quilt is never forgotten.
That's right.
It's just history.
It's history.
Yeah.
And they did it all by hand back in the day.
Right. They didn't. know what
Now people
Yeah.
quilt. They use the sewing machines.
Right.
But
Right.
I could look at some of Mama's stitches on her quilt, and they were just as perfect as someone that would use a sewing machine.
Mm-hmm.
So
When you take pictures of the quilts that
Mm-hmm.
their mom and my mother-in-law made, you'll see their stitches is just as good as a sewing machine.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe how neat,
Mm.
Gladys
Mm-hmm.
did.
And they would start out with blocks, just little square blocks. And it's just amazing how a certain way they put them together, they form these different patterns.
Mhm.
But you wouldn't think with just that block
Mm-hmm.
that it would turn out to be something as beautiful as it does. But it's just amazing how little pieces of strips of material can make the beautiful patterns that are on the quilts that they
Yeah.
make.
It's almost like before they sew it together, they have the vision, they have the picture already in their mind, the way they want it to look. Yeah. Well, let's look at some of these quilts.
Gladys Little hand stitched this quilt here. She this was one of her last ones before she passed. And Gladys was 85, 85, I think, when she passed away. But this is the last one she made. And it's hand stitched, but it's quilted machine quilt.
Mm-hmm.
But she did piece by piece.
Mm-hmm. What kind of pattern is that?
I don't know what the name of this pattern, but I know that she made several of them like this.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave her quilts away as she made them to her kids and stuff. And like Glenna said,
Mm-hmm.
none of them, I don't think any of them really appreciated, because we would go up to her sister-in-law's and they'd be on the floor with the dogs on them, raggedy, it's a shame. And then I think that's when she stopped, giving them out the way she was doing.
Yeah. And that's the thing. We got to get this appreciation.
Right. Right.
They were made back, the quilts were made back then, for necessity to stay warm and that kind of a thing. But they didn't realize that they were creating art.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Glad it wasn't a spider. Okay. This one here, me, Cheyenne, made this one. I started embroidering first. And as I get old, I don't know my kids. I can't remember my grandkids and great-grandkids' birthday. So I put a family tree, made a family tree quilt with their name and their birthday for all of us. Down at the bottom, I started with the adults. And then as I climbed up, I went up to the babies. And these three here was the last ones. And I'm going to have to add one on because I had a newborn Sunday. So I'm going to have to add on to it.
So is that what you call a family tree quilt?
Yeah, family tree quilt.
Did you think up that?
This is my own
All right.
idea.
And you said you have to add a block now because, so it's like this is a quilt that's never finished.
Exactly. And
Wow.
then when I'm gone, I hope and pray that somebody just go ahead and get it quilted, finished, and keep it.
Wow.
But as I'm living, I'm not going to quilt this. I'm going to let whoever takes it add the quilt. Now this one here is my Gladys, my mother-in-law quilt. Her name Abby, like they said, they love flowers, little bitty print flowers. And all this fabric here, she had left over. So I cut all the flowers into this, I don't know the pattern, the name of it, but I said, that's a lot of flowers. So I just, I made this up from the the fabric she had, my mother-in-law.
All right.